Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Grit City Think and Drink. I am your host, Jim Gow. I'm a professor at the University of Washington, Tacoma, which normally is across the street from where we usually do this, but since I'm in my house, that's not the case. I'm glad you all could join us tonight, and I just want to give you a little bit of primer for those of you who might be new to the Grit City. We will have our amazing talk after I introduce our speaker here in just a second. We do this every second Tuesday of the month. We are still waiting to confirm our schedule for 2021, but January 12th is the next talk, and we'll put the details up on that Grit City Think and Drink website that you found the link for this one. So just go there. One, you can find what's coming down the pipe for the next talks. And two, you can actually see talks you missed. So we've been recording these. We are recording this one right now. And we will put those up there so you can check it out. So we hope that you will see some of those that you missed and come and join us again in January. When we are able to get back together in person, we'll be giving details of where we'll be heading for that. And we hope you will join us in person where we're able to do that again. So welcome. We will have, after Carolyn gives an amazing talk, we will have a short break where we will give away some Think and Drink swag, and then Carolyn will take some question and answers, and you can play Stump the Speaker, and we'll get you out of here in time to go home or go and watch something else on the computer. So I will stop sharing my screen. And Carolyn, if you want to share yours. And 1 second. All right. And to introduce our speaker, Dr. Carolyn West is professor of clinical psychology at UW-Tacoma, where she teaches courses on the psychology of Black women and sex crimes and sexual violence. Dr. West also has written extensively on racism in sexualized media. In 2018, she produced the documentary, Let Me Tell Y'all About Black Chicks, Images of Black Women in Pornography, which has been screened at international conferences. She has worked as an expert witness in domestic violence, sexual assault cases, delivered keynote addresses, conducted workshops, and created innovative training materials to educate and equip professionals with the skills to provide culturally sensitive services to domestic violence and sexual assault survivors of color. She can be reached at her website, drcarolynwest.com, if you want to learn more about what she does. And without further ado, Dr. Carolyn West.
Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it. This is a new area of research, so it's exciting to really be able to share this new body of work that I've been working on and just starting to think through. So I'm calling this talk From Black Lives Matter to Black Wives Matter, exploring how pornography has sexualized social justice movements. And before I sort of jump into this, I try to give a trigger warning at first, because I think this is really difficult topic to talk about. And there won't be any nudity or explicit images or anything like that, but there will be a discussion of sexual assault, sexual violence, and some of the images that we'll talk about tonight around racism in porn are just deeply racially offensive and can be triggering to people. So I do just try to make people aware of that before we sort of launch into this area of research. In fact, this is some of the most challenging work that I do. And as Jim mentioned, I do research and work as an expert witness. So I can look at homicide photos and just really horrible things, but nothing has really sort of disturbed me and triggered me as this body of work has. But I do think it's important that we have conversations about it. So just to start off with a trigger warning. Here's part of the reason that I do this work. Pornography is everywhere. And they collect meticulous statistics about the porn industry. And one of the biggest websites, Pornhub, and these are the 2019 statistics, 42 billion visitors to Pornhub in 2019. And that's about 115 million visitors a day. So we're talking about the population of Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, all combined visiting this one website in just a day. And this is just one. So we have to start having conversations about how pervasive porn is, and particularly the content of porn. And so that's where my research has kind of taken me in the last few years. Now, I'm a domestic violence researcher and a sexual assault researcher. And just a few days ago in the New York Times, opinion columnist wrote this incredible piece on the children of pornography. And this particular story was about a young girl at 14 years old. She felt pressured, she had a crush on this young man to share some photos of herself. And she shared the photos, he posted them on Pornhub, which of course, that becomes child pornography. But the reality is there's a lot of that kind of content on mainstream porn sites. And so being aware of that, so understanding as I was doing more of this research, working with trafficking survivors, working with domestic violence survivors, I'm seeing pornography just pop up more and more and more in the work that I'm doing with either perpetrators kind of pressuring victims to make pornography or taking photos of them and posting them on various websites. So we have to kind of look at what does this mean for our larger society and the impact that it has around violence in particular. So I got really interested in this topic in 2015. I was sitting around with a group of colleagues and we were just talking about our research. And they were all doing research on pornography. And I asked the question, well, is anybody looking at racism and race in pornography? And nobody was really looking at that work. So we actually decided to start our own academic journal for a few years so we can disseminate the work that we were doing on sexualized media and society. So did that for a few years and got really interested in understanding, well, why is nobody looking at race and racism in pornography? And so again, the porn industry collects such meticulous statistics. There is one website where all the information is so neatly organized. And taking a look at that website found that if you were going to look at race and pornography, African Americans in pornography is a huge category. In fact, there were more than 7,000 DVD titles and new releases. So it's a common area that people were kind of producing content. So I got really interested in trying to figure out what are the tropes and stereotypes that can be found around race and racism with this particular population. And I started writing just blog posts and opinion pieces on pornography and race. And then they started getting shared just thousands of times. And so I was really started off being very interested in Black women in pornography and wrote a couple of pieces on that. And then ended up producing, I was always interested in documentary films. So this is what happens when you're a full professor and you have, I guess, too much professional development money. And so I thought, well, now is a great time to do this research. So I ended up doing a documentary on the topic called Let Me Tell You All About Black Chicks, Images of Black Women in Pornography, and started doing virtual screenings all around the world on this topic and just really talking about it in more detail. So the reason people oftentimes ask me, well, why is it called Let Me Tell You All About Black Chicks? The reason I use that title is because one of the first interracial porn videos that came onto the home video market was in 1985. That was when the VCR became popular. And you didn't have to go to a movie theater to watch porn, you could just watch it in your home. So one of the first videos that became really popular, interracial video, was called Let Me Tell Y'all About Black Chicks. And it was very quickly taken off the home video market. And this is why. There was a scene in that video featuring white performers dressed as Ku Klux Klan members having an interaction with an African American woman and using some pretty extreme racial slurs. And they said, you can still find that on the internet today, but it was taken out the home video market because the producer said, we want to be as politically incorrect as possible. And they managed to do that to the point where the company said, well, maybe this is a bridge too far. So here's why that is a problem. That particular scene was a problem, I believe. Is when we sanitize, eroticize that kind of sexual violence and take it out of its historical context, we end up negating the real history of sexual violence against African American women, which started prior to slavery in this country, throughout the enslavement period, all through Reconstruction and into the Jim Crow era. So it's not like you can watch those images and not understanding the history and the deep trauma around that is very problematic, because the Ku Klux Klan and other vigilante groups like that frequently sexually assaulted Black women. And one really disturbing case that we've unearthed is Reese Taylor in 1944, who was sexually assaulted by 6 men in her community. And actually, Rosa Parks, before she did the Montgomery bus boycott, went to Alabama and advocated on her behalf. So that kind of sexual trauma involving Ku Klux Klan members and others was a common experience that was deeply disturbing. So when you sexualize that, we erase that history. So I got really concerned about that. And I also started to find that pornography was also sexualizing and minimizing sexual trafficking in Black girls. So I found that Black women and girls were more so than other racial groups, to be depicted as prostitutes and sex workers. So you'll see common titles like Black Girls Work in the Streets, Pimp My Black Teen, Exploited Black Teens. You know, they didn't even pretend to sanitize what they were talking about. They were coming right out and saying that this is what the content of this material is. And that's hugely problematic for this reason. African American girls are disproportionately more likely to be victims of sex trafficking. Girls of all ethnic backgrounds certainly are, but Black girls are overrepresented among those statistics. And in fact, according to the FBI, 59% of prostitution arrests of girls under the age of 18 were African American, which is hugely problematic because they're actually victims and they can't even give consent, but they're being arrested. And also, I do research on buyers of men who purchase sex. And they're also targeting African American girls. And so they're seeing what's in pornography. The message is that this is an acceptable population target for that kind of conduct. So I got interested in how pornography sexualizes social justice movements this summer, because it was Father's Day and this organization asked me to write a blog post to talk about Black men in pornography. More people kept asking me, you're writing about pornography, what about how Black men are depicted? And I thought, well, I haven't really delved into that much, so maybe let me take a look and see what's happening there. And I was equally disturbed with the images that I'm starting to find there as well. So I wrote this blog post, Who's Your Daddy? Exploring the images of Black men in pornography. And I wrote, the porn industry doesn't even try to disguise the racism. They will use terms mandingo, bucks, black beast. I mean, these terms harken back to the antebellum period. And so pornography is filled with these kinds of terms with Black men as well. And again, this is why I think this matters and why we should be concerned about this. 1915, The Birth of the Nation was filmed. It was a silent film that lasted about 3 hours. And there was a scene in that film. We started to see this kind of notion of the Black male buck who was a predator, a sex offender. And there was a scene where a person in blackface, dressed up like a Black male character, and was chasing after this white woman. And in order to avoid a sexual assault, she leaps off a cliff to escape this. And the premise of the movie, part of the premise was, it was Reconstruction. So we have to pass all of these laws and we have to establish the Ku Klux Klan, because if we don't, Black men will just be running amok, just sexually assaulting people. And so that kind of notion that Black men were predators and violent and dangerous really took root in cinema and media. And so the implications of that were mass lynchings. Here's an article, a document that I really like that just really was published recently, Reconstruction in America. And they did intensive research and found that between these years, between Reconstruction and decades after, there were more than 6,000 lynchings in this country. Now, people were lynched for a variety of reasons. Economic, if you tried to start a business, if you attempted to vote, or just for no reason at all. But often lynching was at the heart of why those lynchings took place. Oftentimes, this notion that Black men were dangerous and predators. And the author of one document even said, we've got to do this to make sure that the country is not overrun with these dangerous African American men. So lynching, periodic lynching, is somehow necessary in order to prevent that happening. And so as I thought about that history, I started to see elements of that kind of birth of a nation within porn. And that disturbed me as well. Now, some of you may remember the movie 12 Years a Slave. It was a biographical film of this slave narrative of a New York freeborn Black man. He was kidnapped in Washington, D.C. by 2 con men and sold into slavery in the South. And he was there for 12 years. And the porn industry seems to make parodies of everything. So they quickly made a parody from 12 Years a Slave to 12 Inches a Slave. And the company that made it was appropriately called Hot Mess Entertainment. And it was pretty much a hot mess. So they actually used the language that we saw in Birth of a Nation you know, 5 lily white chicks ravaged. So that kind of terminology by big black bucks. So again, that message becomes just like with Black women in sexual assaults by the Ku Klux Klan of being sexualized, that kind of sexual trauma of being sexualized and eroticized in some deeply disturbing ways. And it just goes on and on. So with the interracial porn, some of the racism that I found there was just almost jaw dropping to me. It's almost as they say, how can we put in as many offensive racial stereotypes as possible um, in this media? So this was a series that was around for a while. Oh no, there's a Negro in my mom. You knew the day would come. No amount of jails or loan denials could prevent it. You know, the Negroes are moving into the suburbs, but you never thought that they would invade your home or your mom. So sit back and watch everything that you once knew as pure and beautiful be destroyed. So everybody, just like every racial stereotype that we've seen for the last hundreds of years, deeply embedded in this, in the descriptions of the titles and descriptions of these things. And it's just, you know, sometimes I think there are people in rooms sitting down, like writing this down, okay? So just think about that too. And so it goes on and on and on. So another series, another title from that series. You know, remember when you were a kid and your mom used to take you to the zoo and, you know, you felt unsafe with the animals, but you felt protected with her. But now imagine coming home and basically one of the animals is in your house and they're not in cages anymore and they captured your beloved mother. And so it's like too late for her. And then to add just another level of offensiveness to it, now with even Black or Negroes. I mean, they just, it's baffling to me that they can produce this kind of content that you would not find any in other forms of media. So again, why this really matters is because these images permeate all of society. And I just thought about Dylan Roof when he went, he was in South Carolina and he shot up this church of the 9 parishioners and killed them. And when he was interviewed, one of the survivor members said, you know, he said, you know, they're like, why are you doing this? You know, like, why are you slaughtering us this way? And he said, you raper women, you're taking over our country, you have to go. And so it's a part of that long history, again, of this notion of Black men being so dangerous. They have to be annihilated. Now, I'm not saying that he shot up this church and killed all these people because of pornography, but I'm saying that what is it about porn that we can erase that history and kind of create these images? And then what happens when this image is permeated throughout society and including in porn, we cannot take it seriously? And is it another thing that shapes how we view uh, men of color in this society? And so that's where we get to Black Lives Matter, because in 2013, the movement began as a hashtag after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting of Trayvon Martin. So it started off as a hashtag, then it became this national movement as more, we started to be aware that this is happening all the time in our culture, that we need to make Black Lives Matter in some important ways. So this movement started, and then a couple of years after that, as the hashtag started to take off and the movement grew, pornography immediately jumped in and started to sexualize that. So in 2015 or so, the porn video Black Lives Matter was produced, and it's like the revolution is here and it's hardcore. And then a couple of years after that, Black Lives, Black Lives Matter too, backed by popular demand. And so the interracial videos, you'll see much more of that kind of racism there as well. So, civil rights have never been dirtier. So again, sexualizing these these movements, and I'll be curious to see what other people think when we get to the discussion. What are the implications of this, and why does this happen? But it's almost a way to minimize these movements and make them not important, so that we can uncomfortable, maybe feel more comfortable dismissing them when we think about who's consuming pornography. But so after the George Floyd event happened, after that tragic event, and the whole country and whole world is coming together to talk about violence against African American men, Adult Video News published a post uh, talking about some connections that George Floyd had with the porn industry. And people were pushed back immediately and said, this man was brutally murdered in the street and lost his life. And this is what you do. This is highly offensive, highly inappropriate. And so, just like other companies were putting out statements saying, oh, Black Lives Matter, we stand with Black lives. They were trying to be good corporate citizens, I guess. And then the CEO of Adult Video News put out a statement saying, let there be no mistake. We stand with the Black community in its fight against injustice and discrimination. And it's like, well, no, you don't. If you're posting videos where people are hurling the N-word, I kind of question that, but okay. And so I started to think, I called my good friend Gail Dines up, and I said, and she's been doing research on pornography for decades. And I said, are you seeing this movement being sexualized in some ways? Because I'm continuing to see things that I hadn't noticed before as I was doing research on racism in porn. So we ended up writing this opinion piece for Slate. And we were finding the same things repeatedly. Like, if you go to Pornhub and these other sites, you could literally find thousands of videos with that hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I don't know if it's because that was popular or they wanted people to click on them, but I'll just say they weren't empowering videos, and they really weren't about social activism. I'll just say that at that. So we were seeing that happening. And even more disturbing is that now people are going to Black Lives Matter's protests and taking creep shots and then posting them on porn sites. So creep shots are, you go to a protest and people have their hands up, or they're laying in the streets, or they're appearing to be vulnerable in some ways. And people were actually going there, taking photos of women without their consent and permission, and seeing if they could take upskirt videos or uh, pictures of women in sort of compromising pictures, and then posting them on porn sites, and then sexualizing those images as well to further sexualize that movement. So that's a thing, regrettably. And then even protesters were then also sexualizing the movement as well. So hopefully this did not happen too often, but there were actually people making protest signs, basically, again, going back to the images that we talked about from Birth of a Nation, of people kind of sexualizing particularly Black men's bodies. These kinds of signs, well, I'm out here protesting because, like, I just like Black men's genitalia, so that's my contribution to the movement. And I would argue you probably want to kind of check your moral compass if that's what's mobilizing you to protest against state-sponsored violence against African Americans. But uh, leaving that aside for the moment, so that was just yet another example of maybe occasionally people kind of sexualizing these movements as well. But I guess I would say the point is we have to recognize more and more that the porn industry is always going to do this. When the feminist movement became really popular in the 70s, and feminists started to push back against the porn industry, and they were complaining to Larry Flint, who started Hustler. You need to stop treating women like pieces of meat. This is offensive. He immediately put on the cover in 1978, you know, we will no longer hang women up like pieces of meat, and proceeded to create an image where a woman's body was fed into a meat grinder as if she were a piece of hamburger, and said this is the last meat issue. So for the porn industry, and I think maybe it's a site where it's a place where you could just be so politically correct and say things that maybe you couldn't say or wouldn't say in polite society because it's pornography. So maybe there are no boundaries or guardrails around that or something. And so people will do that. And we're seeing the same thing happening with the Me Too movement. If you go to porn sites and you type in Me Too, you'll see thousands of videos as well. So that becomes sexualized. And after the Bill Cosby situation, they immediately put made a porn parody of that as well. So that's kind of like where we are uh, with what we're working with the industry. And so the statement now is with adult video news, they realize that racism, or they're starting, I guess, to realize that racism in porn is a problem. And here's their response to this, that they're saying, you know, as an industry, we have to do better, and we can. So I'm not necessarily heartened by this, but so they're going to eliminate the interracial categories. They're going to clean some of that up. They're going to get rid of the interracial and ethnic categories for the Adult Video News Award. And they're promising that they understand that these images are filled with racist marketing and stereotypes, and this has been going on for too long. And we can choose to do better, and we can no longer deny that films amplify racism and discrimination. And I'm not really hopeful that that will happen. But as I move forward with this body of research, I really want to start thinking about what does this mean for social justice movements, and how does this impact us, and what we're consuming. And so I'll go ahead and stop there. And I think Jim is going to get on, and he's going to do our prizes.
Thank you, Carolyn. Let's give it up for our speaker, Carolyn West, everybody, virtually. Thank you very much. That's pretty powerful stuff. It's a little bit disruptive to give away things now, but we want to do that before you get off. So these, what we're giving away today is a couple, oops, can't remember where your camera is. A couple of pairs of these lovely Think and Drink socks, which several of you won, so that you can help promote this event and get public education out there and bring in more speakers. So we're going to give away 2 pairs. The first one, so to participate and to ask questions later on, you're going to use your chat function. So you all should be able to chat. And what the first question for the first pair of socks is to pick, I am thinking of a state where I was born. So if you, the first person to actually guess closest to that state, so just chat your answers in the chat box. First one to get it gets a pair. Wisconsin is not me. Either is Minnesota or Connecticut, not Michigan. Not New York, not, oh, Brittany, it's Maryland. Brittany, first one to guess. I was born in Balmer, for those of you who are from there. Actually, officially Catonsville. Awesome. And then for the second pair of socks, you have to guess the state where I went to undergrad. I did go to undergrad, just so you know. So it's not a trick question. No, it's not Massachusetts. No, Florida, no.
Undergrad.
No, they have schools in California? No, sorry. That was a comment. Oh, Ricky, Rhode Island, she's on it. Ricky gets the second pair of socks. So since you're only chatting with me, so if Brittany and Ricky can send me your mailing addresses, I will send the socks to your door. And you can show off your Think and Drink pride. And when we get together again, I expect everybody to wear all their Think and Drink swag, so we have purple socks galore. All right, now we want to ask the speaker whatever you would like. So if you can chat your questions in, I will feed the questions to Carolyn and she will do her best to answer them. Oh, sorry, the two people who won socks, if you can also let me know whether you are a small / medium or a medium / large in socks. Kristen wants to know if you would mind sharing what your t-shirt says.
It is John Lewis, get into good trouble.
Nice.
Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get into good trouble, necessary trouble. So he's one of my heroes and recently passed away. And so much of my life, as I think about this work that I do, that this is exceedingly difficult emotional work. And there are conversations that I'm oftentimes having that people don't want to have. But in my mind, that is good necessary trouble when I think about the impact that some of these issues have on the world. So that's why I keep doing it.
Nice. Will and Steve ask, what is the format of Pornhub? Is it an upload site or does Pornhub curate what content is?
It's an upload mostly. They're supposed to curate things and remove things like child porn and other issues. But people are uploading millions of things. Just in 2019, if you wanted to watch everything that was uploaded, it would take you 150 years of your life to do that. I mean, you just can't. There's just too much content. So they're supposed to curate things and make sure that inappropriate things are not being posted, but apparently that is not happening.
Gotcha. Mary asks, and oops, just lost it. Come back here. I suspect I already know the answer, but I'm thinking the porn customers might be disproportionately the same group already buying into racism. Have you looked into that at all?
Oh, I mean, that would be amazing to do. I know the industry collects really good statistics on who the consumers are. I mean, what I showed you with the 2019 statistics, they can tell you who's watching what in what country. They can tell you when, like if the Super Bowl is on, people watch less porn. If it's Valentine's Day, I mean, they collect meticulous statistics, and I've actually been spending time going to the Adult Video Expo in Las Vegas before the pandemic hit. to actually really go in. That's a big trade show for the porn industry to learn more about it. But I haven't really talked to consumers enough or really seen a body of research to know exactly who's consuming that interracial porn and like what would their motives. And that would be really curious for me to kind of understand, because nobody's producing, you don't produce um, the porn, 80s, Fear of the Black Penis version 87 if the first 86 versions didn't sell well. So somebody's buying this, and it must be working for somebody because you continue to be producing it. So it would be really interesting to see what's the mindset or the interests of people who are consuming this and why, and what their racial attitudes are, and sort of which came first, the racial attitudes and they're attracted to this, or did porn shape those racial attitudes? And that'd be a very fascinating study, but I haven't seen anything on it.
Seems like that would be a really tough group to
access,
to actually get good info from, I would guess. But so Leanne asks, can you say more about the role of humor in porn titles and its role in reframing the serious and traumatic events you've spoken about?
That's a really good question. They'll make parodies of everything. So that really sort of makes sense. Anything Star Wars, there's actually even pandemic porn. So even though we're closing in on 300,000 people who've lost their lives just in the US because due to this pandemic, and immediately with COVID, when that started to really get bad, it was immediately COVID. So, that's just what they do to keep themselves relevant and to get clicks. But in terms of humor, I think maybe that is a way to sort of sanitize this. And then if you don't understand the history behind this trauma, it makes it easier sort of not to take it seriously, because the people who are even consuming this don't even understand that long history of sexual violence. And I think maybe in some ways where I get a backlash from doing this research, because I'm making it harder for people to enjoy their porn watching because I'm pointing out the racism there. And so you're ruining it for people or something. But I think humor is a big part of it. And I think when it's couched in humor, then people can say, well, you shouldn't be offended by it, or you can't see it as overly racist because it's just humor and you're critiquing it. And that just means you don't have a sense of humor, which I probably don't. Not around these topics.
Yeah. Let's see, Rachel asks, thank you for the informative presentation. It sounds like some of the reason the racism is so prevalent in pornography is of the secrecy and deviant platform of pornography. For those to interact with pornography, suggestions on how to do it aligning with your values.
Well, there is a body of like feminist porn where people will say, well, we're producing porn that is not degrading to any particular group and represents different body types and is more erotic and not pornography. But the reality is that most of your mainstream porn doesn't necessarily involve that. So if people aren't finding that or viewing that, they're still going to be impacted. The large population, I would think, would still be impacted by these particular images. So I don't know if there's a way to really kind of create this content, sexually arousing content, to make sure that it's not degrading or dehumanizing to people. And so And I'm not opposed to, I think we have to have spaces, safe spaces, where people can talk about their sexuality, explore their sexuality in a way that's not commodified, in that way where it's a product, and that the industry isn't telling you what you should find sexually appealing, and that dehumanizes other people. So that's a challenge.
Yep, I could see that. Any last questions, anybody? Linda, are you nodding? You have a question? I think she's typing right now, frantically. Give her time. Linda, I'll just unmute you. Why don't you ask your question?
Yeah, just ask a question, Linda. Is there a way we can unmute Linda?
I think I did.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a terrible typist, but it says something like, could you talk a little bit more about the dividing line, or what separates porn from eroticism, or are they the same? Yeah,
No, that's such a good question, because, and it can vary so much from how other people kind of see that.
Yeah.
And so I think that there can be erotic depictions of sex that can be, I mean, I use some of that for my human sexuality course when I talk about sexual techniques. And well, the couples actually talk to each other and they seem to like each other. And it's a mutually agreed upon interaction, and it's respectful in that way. And it's kind of, I guess, is couched in a way that's more educational. So I think that there can be erotic depictions that are not dehumanizing in that way. But where is the line? I certainly don't think that I have the answer to. But my concern is when young people are consuming this to get information because they don't have a safe space to get those questions answered. And I think that can be really problematic. And so we are finding research that's showing that, so many kids are consuming that for sex education purposes. And that's not really a great.
Thank you.
Tanya asks, Dr. West, can you share how your students, especially Gen Z, respond to this topic of racist sexual violence?
I think people are pretty open to it. I think oftentimes people haven't even really thought about it, that there is that porn can be racist. I think a lot of my younger students think, well, everybody just kind of do your own thing, just let your freak flag fly. And just, it's all open, it's all good, just do your own thing. And so they don't necessarily think that porn is a problem. And then when you kind of sit down and unpack, okay, so here's what we're seeing, because they grew up with the internet and maybe were exposed to it pretty early. But then having conversations, and just, my goal is not to tell people what to think, but to say, here are the images that I'm seeing, and what do these images didn't arise out of nowhere? What's the history behind these images? And let's have a conversation that we can't disconnect the images from that history, and then talk about why I see it as problematic.
Thanks. I got another question from Mary. She's asking, are you aware of other studies of portrayals of Black people over time? Is it generally getting more positive, that image?
I think that I do a lot of writing on images, and we're seeing some things are getting better, certainly, but you'll still see elements of racism out. I mean, it's part of our culture. It's really almost hard to get away from that. But I'm heartened to see more people producing images that are more positive and more complex in media. So I'm still hopeful, though. But I think that pornography just can be a site where you can say all the things that you, where you can share that more openly, and there are no consequences.
Gotcha. Any other questions, anybody? If not, I would really like to thank our speaker one more time. Let's give it up for Dr. Carolyn West.
Thanks. And it's so heartening to see all my colleagues and people that I worked with. And I will, as difficult as this work is, I'm going to continue to do it. And we're moving forward to try to work with a media company to get the documentary sold and out and used in classroom settings. And that will be my next project.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for showing up tonight. Make sure that you let folks who know who couldn't make it, that they can see the content probably in about a week or so up on the Think and Drink website. And if, again, if you have ideas for speakers for the 2021 speaker series, please let me know. Be happy to get folks scheduled in. And I am hoping sometime during 2021, we are back in person, and I will buy you all a drink. So you all take care, everybody be well, and we'll talk to you hopefully in January. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.